Hi, everybody. Welcome to Saturday night live feed with gals, ghosts, and ladies. We have a really fun show for you tonight. We're going to be talking about the Pied Piper of Hamelin. If somebody could let me know that they see, give me a comment, a like, let me know that people are out there. And while we're giving folks a chance to get settled in, I'll just do a check-in with everybody. So yeah, we're gals, ghosts, and ladies. And I was kind of saying all paranormal, never politics. Well, we're going to stick with the never politics. Maybe not, I mean, still going to do paranormal, but I feel like the theme is more going towards like the mysterious and the macabre. So we're going to be exploring other things as time goes on besides just paranormal ghost hunting or what I would call like traditional American ghost hunting. We're definitely going to be looking at other things. Like last time we looked at Lizzie Borden and found some really crazy stuff about Fall River that wasn't necessarily paranormal, but sure was mysterious and sure was macabre. Um, so I feel kind of like that's the way we're going with the show. So that being said, I want to remind folks that this is definitely for 18 plus. This program is for adults only. Um, it's disturbing content, and I swear a lot, and you feel free to swear in comments too. Um, I do hope that people are there. I'm monitoring. I don't see any comments yet from anybody. Lisa, if you're there, let me know. And Piper, if you're there, I saw that you followed me. I think that's kind of cool. Piper is tuning into the Pied Piper episode. Um, so again, as I was saying, this is a conversation for folks 18 and older. It is disturbing, and I do like to swear. Um, but it is a conversation, so let me hear your comments. I'm going to try to engage with people. I'll try to like your comments. I apologize if I can't get to all of them. I am new at live streaming. I'm new at StreamYard, which is the software, which I absolutely love and highly recommend if you want to learn how to do streaming. I still have a lot to learn, but it's very user friendly. Um, but feel free to critique me, but please be kind. I really am learning, and I've got some graphics tonight, and they're very rudimentary. So again, critique, but please be kind. I do work full time, so this little live stream is what I would call a labor of love, something I do on the side because I want to do it. So I'm doing it after work and in my spare time. Um, oh, hi, previous possessed painted furniture. Kerry, I think that's Kerry, right? Hi there, glad you could join. Um, so anyway, so we were saying a couple more things about we're 18 plus. Oh, this is also a 420 friendly platform, so smoke them if you got them. I know I will. Feel free to pour yourself a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, a cold beer. Um, get cozy, pull up a blanket and a pillow and get comfortable and listen or watch and make yourself at home. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to new people watching. And if you watch this after the live stream, thank you. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for joining. Let's see, what else did I want to say? So again, I was starting to focus on the paranormal, but I really feel like this program is starting to be geared more towards mysterious and macabre, which definitely can include paranormal. But I feel like if it's just paranormal, that doesn't leave room for other things. So mysterious and macabre. Um, I found the story of the Pied Piper to be both of those things. There's a question. The first question is, how did I get interested in the story of the Pied Piper? Well, some of you know that I am in pest control. I work for Ladybug Pest Control in Quincy, Massachusetts. Always thankful for my day job. Without the day job, there is no night job, no live stream, no nothing. So always thankful for that. But that being said, at Ladybug for a long time, I managed their social media. And believe it or not, there are, well, not just pest control holidays, believe it or not, there's a holiday for everything. Like there's Taco Tuesday and and blah, blah, and bring your puppy to work day and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's a shit ton of pest control days. And so I researched it and so that I could make some fun social media posts to get people engaged in pest control, specifically in ladybug pest control. So, like, there's Bedbug Awareness Month, there's Carpenter Ant Week, there's Termite Awareness Month. But I found in my research, this was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I found in my research that there was National Rat Catchers Day on June 26th every year. And I said, oh, isn't that interesting? So I wrote up a little blurb about it and put it in a newsletter and posted it on June 26th, National Rat Catchers Day. But I didn't just write, oh, you know, the Pied Piper, blah, blah, this and that. I read a little bit about it and I made a headline and I said, oh, the Pied Piper, did he get a bad rap? So anyways, that's what prompted me to want to look a little bit into the story of the Pied Piper. And then I kind of forgot about it. And every year on July 26th, we post happy, Rat Catcher Day. Have you hugged your rat catcher today? So on and so forth. But this year, recently, I don't know what it was that just caught my eye. I think I was just like scrolling through YouTube. And I don't know, was looking like through grim fairy tales and that kind of thing. And he happened to find, oh, hi, Kathy Ferrara, another one of my number one fans, Kathy and Lisa, both always tuning in. And Carrie, thank you all so much for watching. But I was scrolling through YouTube and I think I saw something about the Pied Piper and I watched it and it caught my interest. And I said, oh yeah, I did that thing for Ladybug. What was it that made me think that the Pied Piper got a bad rap? So I decided to do an episode on it and I decided to dig deep. And you know me, I'm going to take a second and show off all my notes on my pink paper with all my colored flare pens that make me so happy. Does anybody remember Harold and the Purple Crayon? That's me when I do my research and have my pink papers and pens all over the place. But anyways, you will forgive me for looking at my notes and you will forgive me for my rudimentary graphics because like I said, I do this part-time. Eventually, I hope to improve my graphics, but I'll get there. But I think you'll understand the points that I'm trying to make. So that was how I got interested in the Pied Piper. So when I started doing a little digging, actually, I found some really interesting stories, some conflicting stories, but all intertwined. So let's kind of what do we know? What do we know? What do we know about Hamelin? Let's see. Well, let's start with this one. Let's see. The Pied Piper of Hamelin, myth or legend? What really happened? Let's find out. So, so tonight, while we're on Mysteries in the Macabre, tonight we're discussing the true story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. But this is the question that I have for you all. Myth versus legend. What's the difference? Is there a difference? I really didn't know. When I was looking up this story about the Pied Piper of Hamelin, it kept saying legend, 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 and then other things, other fairy tales and whatnot would say myth. And I was like, is there a difference? That's interesting to me. Well, it turns out there is a difference between a myth and a legend. A myth is usually a story evolved to explain something, a story that's fantastical. It may involve magic or gods, things that probably don't exist, fantastical stories. I remember when I was a kid, did anybody in my age group have that book by Rudyard Kipling, Just So Stories, about things like how the camel got its hump? And it was an elaborate story about the camel. I don't know. I can't remember. I'm making this shit up. The camel storing water, and that's how it's got the hump there. And there was another story about how the whale got its stomach or its throat or something. Sorry for drinking my water. Like I said earlier, I'm getting over a cold. Um, so those things are myths, magic, fantastical, no dates, no real place that it happened. Um, like I said, involving gods, they give reason to things that we didn't really understand. Lofty explanations. Now, a legend, on the other hand, is usually based in truth. So the Pied Piper is a legend. So a legend is usually based in truth. It can be fictionalized, it can be embellished over time, but as the story evolves, it kind of weaves a history of a certain culture as things get added throughout time. But a legend usually can state people, dates, places. And as you will see with the story of the Pied Piper, even as things get added to the story, some things don't change, like the date of something happening. So this is a legend. So it is true. This isn't just a fairy tale of something happening, of somebody ridding the town of rats or ridding the town of the kids. Something really happened. And I think you'll be interested to find out what happened. But why is going to be, there's even more questions to that. I have a whole page of theories. It's crazy. So anyway, so without further ado, I'm going to kind of jump in. Let's see, let me pull up my, oh, and Michelle has joined us. I'm going to pull up my comments. And Lisa, thank you. I'm glad you liked the backdrop. I thought it was kind of appropriate for a story about Hamelin. I have to thank Timu. That's where I've been buying my backdrops. And I have many, and I'm looking forward to trying them out. So anyway, so this is where you'll find Hamelin, Germany. And it's in the Lower Saxony region of Germany, but it's kind of in the upper north, kind of northwest area. It started booming like between 950 and 1348. It's kind of important to remember that date, 1348. But in Hamelin, Germany, there had been a, a migration of Celtic pagans from Ireland, United Kingdom, and that area. So they migrated there. If you look at the inset map, that one's there just to show that there's a river that kind of runs through it that doesn't show on the bigger map. And that's is it the Weser or the Wesen? Excuse me. While I go to page 2, the Weser River. And so Hamelin, Germany was located on that river. We might come back to this map later. You'll see I've got a couple things pointed out in blue and another pin dropped over near Transylvania, but we're going to talk about that a little later. But so you see that Hamelin, Germany is on the Wesen River, and between 950 and 1348, it really did enjoy a boom of people. Like I said, pagans and Celtics. That came from that kind of England area. And because they lived on the river, they enjoyed trade, very fruitful trade with other countries. They traded in things like salt, linens, wool, beer and wine, certainly. Let's see. They were also artisans, and they did crafts and they did etchings, and they sold that. And it was a very bustling activity on the riverfront. So again, that was from about 950 to 1348. But also what was happening at that time, these were pagans that were coming over from England. During that time in the late 900s, there was a crusade by St. Boniface from the Romans to Christianize that area. So people in that area were being newly Christianized during that time. And again, I don't ever want to have a colonization conversation with anybody. I'm just telling you what I learned. Also, by the way, I did all this research myself. So any errors in anything are 100% mine. If you want to know my sources, I'll be glad to tell you what they are later offline. But like I always say, don't take my word for it. Look it up for yourself. Maybe you'll learn something too, you know. But another thing that was going on at that time, in 900, 1100, during that medieval time, was currency started becoming popular. People used to like trade cattle and agriculture, but that can be really subjective. I might think that your corn is worth more or less, well, less than you might think it's worth. And if you want to settle a land dispute with your landlord, you don't want to own 3 cows. You want to know exactly what you own, because he might say you own 5 cows. I'm painting things with a really broad brush, but I think you understand how currency really, the use of currency really kind of standardized things and helped people be subjective about the worth of things. So I thought that was very interesting, because I never really thought about that. It's like, oh, when did currency become popular? Not something I thought of. But I bring that up because there is currency involved in the story, as you will hear. So, and also, if I didn't mention it, it brought uniformity. So the same value had the same value, had the same value. I think you understand what I'm trying to say there. So let me take a look at my outline. So that is the history of Hamelin. So we know that there's a Grimm fairy tale. I don't exactly remember the Grimm fairy tale version when I was a kid. I remember the rats disappearing. I remember the kids disappearing. I don't know if I remember them being together in the same story. It wasn't one of my favorite stories, so it really didn't stick out to me that much. And then there's a tale of each, and then there's a tale of both. I think I'm going to tell the story of both. And this is what happened. So this is the story. So and it's also commemorated by a poem by Robert Browning from the 1800s, although he quotes a different date, and he was a very dramatic poet anyways, and this is a very dramatic poem. I will kind of reference it in a minute after I tell you a little bit about what they say was going on. So this is the story of both. So in 1284, that's the year 1284 AD, after the death of Christ, in the year of our Lord, 1284, rats were really running amok in the city of Hamelin. What Robert Browning says about them in his poem is, if you go right to the second box, rats, they fought the dogs and killed the cats, and bit the babies in the cradles, and eat the cheeses out of the vats, and licked the soup from the cook's own ladles, split open the kegs of salted sprats, made nests inside men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's chats by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharps and flats. So to me, that's a lot of rats, even though, like I said, Browning is a bit dramatic. But the story does go that the town was very overrun with rats. So the Burgermeister and Burgermeister, Michelle, say it. The Burgermeister of Hamelin, Michelle, I'm going to wait for you to say it. If somebody doesn't say it, I'm going to burst. The Burgermeister put out that he was looking for somebody to rid the town of rats because it was destroying everything, the crops and the clothing and everything. Okay, I'm going to say it, guys. Meisterburger? No? Anybody? No? Come on, where's all my the Christmas special people? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyways, the Burgermeister of the town hired out for somebody to get rid of all the rats, and this man arrived, and he showed up and said, I can get rid of your rats. And he was called the Pied Piper because he was dressed in pied clothing, and pied meant colorful and bright. I never knew that until I looked this up. So he's dressed in very colorful and bright clothing. There's actually a written account of what he looked like, and this written account is from 1370, and it's really quite a description of what this guy looks like. Exactly, Lisa. Christmas. You got it. Bingo. 5 points to you. But listen to this description of what they said this guy looks like. And Kathy, I knew you were going to get it too, and I was waiting for Michelle to get it. But again, they're really describing a really strange fellow. He follows a marvelous wonder. Oh, here follows a marvelous wonder which transpired in the town of Hamelin in the diocese of Minden in this year of our Lord, 1284, on the feast of St. Joseph and Paul. We're going to come back to that about the feasts. A certain young man, 30 years of age, handsome and well dressed, so that all who saw him admired him because of his appearance, crossed the bridges and entered the town by the west gate. He then began to play all through the town a silver pipe of the most magnificent sort. All of the children who heard his pipe. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself in the story I want to tell, but the point I wanted to make there was he was really good looking and kind of a fancier, a dandy, and dressed in very colorful clothing. He really caught people's eye. Is my point. So he said to the burgomaster, I will rid your town of rats for 1,000 guilders. So 1,000 guilders, it's got something to do with gold. And here we're talking about very early on in standardized money. And guilders being gold would have been a really good form of currency because it would have been useful in other areas, probably along the river, along the trade route. There probably would have been a lot of like transient activity then. So guilders would have been a good form of currency. So the Meisterburger agreed. That's my editorial. Agreed to and the townspeople agreed to pay him, excuse me, 1,000 guilders to rid the town of Hamelin of the rats because they were literally in the baby's cribs. They were eating the food. Everybody was freaking out, right? So the Pied Piper gets out his pipe and plays a tune and works his way out of town, and the rats follow him and throw themselves into the Besson River and drown themselves. Every last rat left the town. So he did exactly what he promised he would do for the town of Hamelin, and that was rid them of their rats. So a couple days pass, and now it's June 26th of 1284. And June 26th is the feast of, is it St. Peter and, what did I say? It's the feast of those two saints. I'm sorry, I don't have that right at my fingertips, and I should. But oddly, they say that all the adults are in church for this religious day. Back up. Where is it? Was it here? Anyways, we'll find it. Well, all the adults are in church for this religious thing, and oh, sorry. Let me back up. I kind of lost my train of thought there. So the Pied Piper comes back and he tries to collect his money from the Burgermeister, Meisterburger, and the Burgermeister and the townspeople say, "No way, man. We're not paying you. You want 1,000 guilders, and all you did was play a pipe. We think you brought the rats here and you fooled us, and that this is extortion. Here's 50 guilders." So basically, imagine they promised him $1,000 and they paid him 50. He did what he said, and they reneged and they insulted him. They slapped him in the face, and he said, "You have not seen the last of me. Um, you have not seen the last of me." He was really, really pissed, and he left. And he came back a few days later. There we go. He came back a few days later on the day of the religious holiday, the feast of Saint John and Paul. And again, I'm sorry, it's right here in my notes, and I can't find it. Anyways, all the adults are in church, and the Pied Piper showed up, and he played his flute, and all the kids followed him out of town. Now, the story goes that there were 130 children that left, and there were 3 left behind who were left behind to say what happened. There was a deaf child who couldn't hear the music, so wasn't mesmerized and didn't follow it, but watched the children follow the piper into the side of a mountain. That's what the deaf child said. Another child that didn't go was blind because he couldn't see his way, so he didn't go. And a third child didn't go that was lame, and pardon the expression, that's not me, that's what the history says. He was a lame child and he couldn't navigate the territory. So there were 3 people left behind who kind of verified the story of the children being led out of town. And it was the Pied Piper doing that to get revenge for not being paid. So it sounds pretty interesting. And it almost sounds feasible, right? That the town didn't pay what they promised, and the Pied Piper came back, and to get his revenge, he took the children, right? Well, I don't think so. That's not what happened. So what did happen in 1284, when Hamelin was prospering and nobody said anything about rats, what did happen in 1284 was that 130 children disappeared on June 26th from the town of Hamelin, Germany. No rats, no nothing. Nobody says anything about rodents or vermin or anything like that. It's documented and it's verified in many ways. That somebody showed, here it is, on the day of John and Paul, 130 children in Hamelin went to Calvary and were brought through all kinds of danger to the Coppin Mountain and lost. So this piper showed up and played his pipe, and the children followed him and left. But there were no rats. There was no payment dispute. Who was this guy? Why did he show up? And where did the kids go? That's what the questions are. Isn't that crazy? So that's what I found out. So this is the start of the legend, is the true history. The true history is that in 1284, somebody showed up in Hamelin and 130 kids disappeared. It is written in history. Let's see, what do I have for that? In 1300, there was a stained glass window put up in a church to commemorate what had happened. It did get destroyed in 1660, but in 1300, this was erected on the day of John and Paul, 130 children in Hamelin. Like I said a few minutes ago, you can read that yourself. So there was documentation of this being real just a few years after it happened, 1284 to this is 1300. Documentation that it happened. There's let's see, bear with me for a moment and see what else I can find for other documentation. There were carvings made commemorating the 100-year anniversary. These are not the real carvings, of course. It's just kind of my rudimentary graphic. But they literally made a commemorative stone that said it is 100 years since our children left. And then they also made another one that said, in the year 1284, after the birth of Christ, from Hamelin were led away 130 children born at this place, led away by a piper into a mountain. So this is a few 1300. The stained glass window is a few years after they disappeared, and then this is 100 years after they disappeared. And then nobody's saying anything about any rats. So why were the children led away? What's weird is rats aren't introduced to this story until 1559, 300 years later. So kind of when I said about ladybug pest control, that I said, did the Pied Piper get a bad rap? Well, I think I don't know. I mean, I guess he led the kids away, but I don't know. This is just very interesting. He didn't lead the rats out of there. I don't know. So rats weren't introduced until 300 years later. And the other version of the story that I told you, where they didn't pay him, that story came about 300 years later. The facts are that 130 children disappeared. and the Pied Piper leading the rats and being owed money, that story didn't happen till years later. I find that to be very bizarre. There's handwritten accounts of this from 1370. There's official written records from 1384. There's some interesting theories about this. They say that maybe, pardon me, I'm looking at my notes, that maybe the Black Plague, this might have been a euphemism for the Black Plague in 1284. Well, if you remember early on, I said there was a boom in that area of Hamelin, Germany, and it ended in 1348. Well, the Black Plague couldn't have killed children in 1284 because the Black Plague didn't show up until almost 60 years later in 1348. So that's not what killed the kids, or that's not what got rid of the kids, or that's not what made the kids disappear. So it was not the Black Plague. However, the Black Plague was the end of the economic boom, so to speak. I think things kind of leveled out after that, as things do after plagues, pandemics, whatever, as we know. There's another theory that the children left to join the Children's Crusades. Like I said, St. Boniface was leading the Christianization of these pagan people. No judgments, whatever. But the Children's Crusades, in my research, were really unsustainable. Children were not cut out to be, 8, 9, 10 years old, traveling in groups and preaching and not having what they needed to set up camp and to travel and to eat and so on and so forth. It was completely unsustainable, and a lot of kids died doing it. So that's really unlikely, because that was just unsustainable. Then there's a theory called the locator theory. So a locator, I got a graphic here. Let's see if anybody knows what this guy is. Leave this up here for a second. So I would love to hear from anybody on this. I'll leave it there for a second. So a locator, that's spelled with a K, Lokator, in that time period. Let's see if I can share the screen with it. There we go. A locator was somebody that would show up to a town and entice the kids, the young kids, to go to other areas and migrate to other areas and populate and farm and all that kind of stuff. Good guess, Lisa, but no, think again. Good guess. So some people say that it was locators leading the kids to other locations, namely Transylvania. And this graphic does not have anything to do with Transylvania. All right, guys, I'm going to throw it out there. This is the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Anybody remember that? I sure do. And this was a really, really creepy character. So these locators would show up brightly dressed and very attractive to children and entice them and bring them away to other parts of the world and other parts of the country to populate them and to farm them and so on and so forth. So, but when I thought of locators, this is what I thought of. And interesting, this almost like is a Pied Piper character, like, follow me, come with me. He's got lollipops and stuff, but he's really a bad guy. So anyways, I thought that was a really fun graphic. But these locators, the theory behind that is that they took these 130 children and relocated them to Transylvania. So I want you to look at this map again. So you've got Hamelin, Germany. You see where that is. And then you look down towards the left and you kind of see where the Carpathian Mountains are. And you see where Transylvania is. So imagine trying to well, I guess nowadays it would be called trafficking, but imagine trying to traffic 130 children or more, excuse me, through the Carpathian Mountains. You'd be lucky to end up with one alive. Even now in modern times, the Carpathian Mountains are difficult to travel. Transylvania, interestingly, that they bring Transylvania into this story, and it's not about vampires. Transylvania being an area of Romania. But the locators could absolutely not have brought the children through the Carpathian Mountains. They would have been dealing with wildlife, uncharted, not pathways, but uncharted areas. They wouldn't be able to feed them. It would be bad weather. They just couldn't do it. Now, strangely, what does back up that theory of the locators, strangely, what backs that theory up is that in certain areas of Transylvania, there are families that have last names that are very, back then your name was really geographic to where you were. Think of the Godfather, Corleone, from the Corleones from Corleone, Italy. Painting that with a broad brush, but but they found people in Transylvania with names that were very much pinpointed back to Hamelin with really no explanations. But again, it's really hard to justify moving any amount of people through the Carpathian Mountains in the 1200s, never mind nowadays with modern conveniences. Kathy, you would have found it in no time. So that's a theory that is interesting, but I don't know. I struggle with it. There's no physical evidence that these people were moved. These 130 children were actually moved through the Carpathian Mountains to Transylvania, other than the names that ended up there. And there would be some evidence of it. But interestingly, I don't think they ever found evidence of the children, like no bones, no burial site or anything like that. So, but I thought that locator theory was interesting. And there's another theory that this group of people in Hamelin, they were still pagans. Maybe they weren't so Christian after all. And that feast, which feasted the feast of John and Paul on June 26th, happens to coincide with summer solstice, which is very much a pagan holiday, a ritualized holiday. Now, does anybody find it weird that in the original story that all the adults were in church and the kids were just outside and got led away? I find that weird. So to me, the pagan theory has a little bit of kind of logic or common sense to it. Let me know if you think so too. So if they were celebrating the summer solstice instead, because again, it didn't make sense that all the adults are in church and all the kids are outside. 130 kids outside, not an adult in sight. Doesn't jive. So with the pagan theory, they were having a summer solstice, maybe feast or festival. And somebody came along that maybe almost would have been expected, a Pied Piper, so to speak, somebody dressed in colorful clothing and playing a flute to lead the children away to the children's activities. And so the adults, they're drinking, it's pagan festivities, I don't know, I'm sure they're having feasts and all kinds of shit going on. I don't know, I'm guessing, I don't mean any offense to anybody, but that they let the kids go because they thought that this was part of like the summer festival. Only it wasn't. That maybe he was a locator. That maybe, just maybe, he was not really this guy, but he was pretending to be somebody with the summer festival, and he was really one of those locators that I was telling you about. So I thought that was a really interesting theory as well. Not unreasonable. Again, there's no rats in this story. That comes along 300 years later, added in to, I don't know, maybe appease people how they felt about that they lost 130 children in their village with no explanations. Um, I don't know. There's no reasonable reason for them to have added the rats 300 years later. Anyways, so there is one more theory, and I see I've been talking for 40 minutes, so I think this is a good time to kind of roll into that last theory. And I hope you guys have enjoyed the story, and I'm sorry I bounced around, and I'm always so sorry for looking at my notes. I have to admit, though, I wrote so many notes out that I really didn't have to refer to too many. It was all up here. But anyways, so this last theory, take a sip of your drink, have a little puff of your puff, and settle back and listen to this one. This is where tonight's Facta Obscura comes in. There were incidents back during that time period of something called dance sickness. And there were documented incidences of this. And it would be groups of people, a group of children, a group of young women who would seemingly have an episode of mass hysteria where they're all dancing and moving and going someplace all at the same time, almost as if they're following something. And they're all acting in unison, and it's really weird. It's almost like a group hallucination type of a thing. And everybody's dancing but they're moving and they keep going until they don't stop to eat, they don't stop to go to the bathroom, they don't stop to rest, they don't stop, they go until they absolutely stop and die. But it's called the dancing sickness because they're moving. And I don't know, I have to admit, these being modern times, I tend to think, I don't know. So I thought maybe seizures, but I don't know, group seizures that have people actually moving. I don't know. Hear me out. There's some weird shit here. There's some really weird shit here, and let me know what you think. So the dance sickness, I really don't think people were dancing, and I don't necessarily believe in, I don't know, in that kind of mass hysteria kind of a thing. But what does anybody think of when you think of mass hysteria of young people, mass hysteria of young women, mass hysteria, dancing in the moonlight naked, groups of young women? I'm going to leave that one there for a second. What does anybody else think of when I talk about mass hysteria of young people? Um, I don't know what kind of delay there is in me asking these questions. So I want to give folks enough time to have some food for thought on that. So I'm describing something called a dance sickness, and there were documented incidences of this in the 1200s. And groups of people would jump around and dance and move and gravitate and go places, and they would just keep going until they absolutely stopped and dropped. No eating, no drinking, no going to the bathroom, no taking care of themselves. So I'm wondering if that kind of sounds familiar to anybody. I got to get a cough drop. Hang on, guys. Be right back. So, all right. Well, you had enough time. I'm going to throw it out there. How about, Kathy Ferrara? Ding, ding, ding. Kathy, if I were giving out prizes, let's see. How can I? There we go. Kathy nailed it. Salem, Massachusetts. There was a mass hysteria look at what Lisa is saying, and let's see if I can show Lisa's comment as well. So we've got Kathy nailed it with Salem, and then Lisa's saying something about dancing sickness, and a Grateful Dead concert. That's really funny. But yeah, but you kind of get what I'm talking about, that kind of that mass hysteria thing. And Kathy, again, well, how do I star that comment? There we go. Comment of the night by Kathy. What the hell happened, right? So I thought there's a really weird connection between perhaps something like that happened in Hamelin as what happened in Salem, Massachusetts. Well, listen to this. In Hamelin, Germany, they raised wheat. I'm saying it like Stewie. Wheat. They raised wheat. In particular, they raised rye. And young people would be kind of the people to handle that stuff, work in the kitchen, help out in the kitchens, and that kind of thing. And in Salem, Massachusetts, they grew wheat. Again, saying it like Stewie from Family Guy. Wheat. What kind of wheat did they grow in Salem, Massachusetts? Rye. There is a fungus that can grow on rye, in particular after a rainy season or heavy rains. And it's a mold, and I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it. And yep, Kathy, it's a mold. Ergot alkalides, and they grow on rye. And it's a hallucinogenic. And so one of the theories, I learned this years ago when I used to go to UMass. I got my thing to be a substance abuse counselor. That was one of the theories that we learned. I was floored about the girls in Salem, Massachusetts. And I said, that really makes a lot of sense to me, almost like a group poisoning or a mass poisoning, an accidental poisoning, nonetheless. And there were just reports of very similar things, exactly what we're talking. We all know what they said about the girls in Salem. So this just struck me as very odd. I think that is no more an unreasonable theory than any of the other ones, than the locator theories, which is kind of really also sort of reasonable, moving people, except that they didn't find any proof of that. There was no physical evidence of that. And I think along the way, if you were going to move 130 children 1,100 miles, and that's how far. Oh, I made this. I like this. If you were going to move 130 children 1,100 miles through the Carpathian Mountains to Transylvania to relocate, there would be physical evidence. There would certainly be proof of encampments. There would be proof of deaths, because people wouldn't survive. Somebody would not survive that. So again, I think that the dance sickness theory is no far off. The hallucinogenic mold theory is no more far off than any of the other things I presented, the locator theory, and the other theory of the Black Plague that we know wasn't true, because the Black Plague didn't show up in Hamelin until 60 years after the children disappeared. So interestingly, the street that the Piper did lead the children out of, or the street that the children exited the town, is called, and forgive me because I don't speak German, but it's called Bungalowsenstrasse. Bungalowsenstrasse. And that's the name of the street. And I think it exits the East Gate or something like that. But it's the way that the children exited, and supposedly the way that the Piper led the children out. But that means Bungalowsenstrasse means street without drums. And since the 1200s, since 130 children were mysteriously led away from the town of Hamelin in the Lower Saxony region of Germany, there's been no music allowed and no dancing allowed on that street from the 1200s to this day. So to this very day, you cannot play music on Bungalowsenstrasse, which is the street that, regardless of what the details surrounding it are, the street that this town lost 130 of their children without any explanation. So think about that. Hi, Jenny Lee. Thanks for joining. So the town of Hamelin certainly believes this happened. They certainly treat it as real. They commemorate it as real with the stained glass window that showed up in the 1300s, this being a painting. This painting is from 1592, copied from the stained glass window. But again, just go back to some weird things. The day of St. John and Paul, it was a Catholic feast, which weirdly all the adults were in church. I just can't buy that. But it was also for pagan, the summer solstice. So there's also the theory of the children being led away by a piper who was representing himself as somebody as part of that group. Again, I think that none of these theories are completely unreasonable, but weirdly, to me, the one that makes the most sense is the one about the mold. So, Michelle, I see you're saying, wow, it really is strange, isn't it? A very, very strange story, and it certainly was not what I expected. At its core just lies an unsolved mystery. What happened to these kids? And then why were rats introduced 300 years later? Let me take a quick look through my notes and see if I can come up with anything else that I wanted to say about it. No, I think we talked about all the theories. You couldn't move those children through the Carpathians. Wow, yeah, I really covered everything. I think I'm going to go back to one of my banners too. I want to go back to myth versus legend. I think that was really interesting to learn because going forward, I am going to start to wrap things up here. Going forward, I think I'd like to tell more tales like about the Pied Piper, tales of mystery and macabre. That certainly may or may not include tales of the paranormal. If I just talk about paranormal, then I'm not able to include all that other stuff. So I think I'm going to ask folks, if you're going to be watching, let's remember, what's the difference between a myth and a legend, because we're going to want to know this going forward. Myth being magical, gods, lofty explanations of things that nobody knows how to explain or knew how to explain, and legends being real. Like Paul Bunyan is a myth. He was a conglomeration of all the lumberjacks. Annie Oakley is a legend because she was a real person. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. That story, that's a legend. Well, maybe, I don't even know about the Pied Piper, but yeah, I guess so, because he supposedly led the children away. But the fact is, this is a legend because 130 children disappeared mysteriously from the town of Hamelin in the 1200s, and there's just no explanation for it. I hope that I've given everybody some food for thought. If you have any other viewpoints, let me know. I'm more than happy to have a conversation about it. Tonight you watched us, let's see. There we go. Tonight you watched us discuss the true story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. I really, really enjoyed doing the research on this. and was floored by the facta obscura that I found. And I do hope that you enjoyed the story, and I hope that you all learned something. And I hope you'll join us next time as I try to uncover more stories of mystery and macabre. I will be here next Saturday at 5:30. Not quite sure what my topic is going to be. I do have a few irons in the fire. Hopefully I'll post something about it tomorrow. Um, thank you everybody for tuning in, and thanks for watching. If you're new, thanks for tuning in if you've been here before. And if you watch this kind of as a rerun, thank you very much. I do appreciate that as well. So this is Jennifer from Gals. I'm signing out. I've been talking for 55 minutes. And I do hope that you enjoyed the story of the legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Good night, everybody.